Good morning. It is November 17th, 2015. Fred here. I got an email this morning. I got up and I grabbed my coffee and I turned the computer on and to check my emails, and there's an email in there from an unnamed person profanely asking me what makes me such a effing know-it-all. Fair enough. I don't know it all. I readily admit that. I don't know it all. But what I do operate on as a mantra for life is fact versus fiction, logic versus chaos, and critical thinking versus propaganda. I've said this over and over and over again. So, what I do, if I don't know, I seek a professional that does. And this is what I've done for years. This is what I've done with most of my adult life. If I don't know, I find someone that does. Case in point, what I want to read to you this morning. One of my sources for information the past couple years has been a gentleman that is a former CIA intelligence officer that spent the bulk of his career working in the Middle East, in Iran, and Egypt, Syria, Pakistan, Afghanistan. So he has witnessed firsthand the inner workings and the fundamental ideology behind Islam. No, I'm not a know-it-all. Of course, who does know it all? But the truth is out there. We all have the internet now. We all have this little machine right here where you can find the truth. You can read the Quran. You can study the exact text of Sharia law. The truth is out there. But without further ado, allow me to read to you the latest musing from my friend and former CIA intelligence officer that spent almost 20 years working in the Middle East. And it's titled, Time to Take Off the Proverbial Gloves. The reality of the situation which the Western world finds itself in today, as regards Islamic Jihadism, is the direct result of those who espouse liberal and leftist idealisms in Europe and here in the United States, which embrace the world is a beautiful place doctrine. And their belief in the world is a beautiful place, which is even more beautiful under our liberal control. The fact of the matter is that the world is not a beautiful place as long as civilized nations, who through their own past participation in uncivilized conduct should have already learned that it is not acceptable to behave in that manner. It will not be a beautiful place as long as our Western leaders and our American president in particular continue to believe and even personally voice the rhetoric that Islam is not the root cause of the Islamic jihadist situation. The very fact that an overwhelming majority of Muslims around the globe embrace Islam that is still practicing uncivilized methods of the Middle Ages, i.e. death, destruction, and complete intolerance to those of other faiths and beliefs, lends one to understand that traditionally practiced Islam is the very source of the problem. When Islam is finally acknowledged as the root cause and not simply a residual effect on behalf of Islamic jihadists or radicals who merely happen to be members of the Islamic faith, then we in the West will finally know and understand how to deal with Islamic jihadists. Also, as many members of the administration and members of the Democrat Party in the United States Congress have stated in the past, and even as recently as yesterday, to propose that ISIS and the veritable host of other Islamic jihadists are merely reacting to economic disparity, high unemployment, or thrill-seeking as regards their murderous activities and actions directed against the innocent civilians of the nations of the West, and not to address the real reason behind their resentment towards our way of life and our citizens, is simply beyond the bounds of credibility, is simply pure fallacy. For this so-called resentment, as the liberal left continuously attempts to rationalize and justify, stems solely from the fact that we in the West are not predominantly adherents to fundamental and traditional Islam and Sharia. Therefore, in their eyes, those of the average Muslim, not only are we all to be considered as fair game to kill, maim, and enslave, but in their eyes, after they have read their own holy book, we must be made to be completely and totally submissive to Islam, or, if we refuse, or even voice opposition, to be simply exterminated. This is not to say, of course, that every single Muslim will undertake violent jihad against us, but I find it most troubling that these very Muslims will voice support for those Muslims who actually do engage in violent jihad against us. Yet, we have a president and serving members of the U.S. Congress, as well as candidates running for the office of President of the United States, who consistently refuse to address the issue's root cause for what it is. It is an integral part of a conventional Islamic beliefs. What I mean by stating this is that radical Islamists are those Muslims who would change Islam's 7th century conventions and penchant for violence and murderous intolerance of non-Muslims and bring Islam into a modern and tolerant setting. That is what is considered to be a radical Islamist by the vast and overwhelming majority of Islam practicing Muslims themselves. I will expound a bit upon that last statement. One has to fully understand that to the average Muslim, these radical Islamists that we refer to, the likes of ISIS and others, are not what are considered to be radical Islamists by the majority of practicing Muslims throughout the world today. Hence, there is the perpetual paucity of opposition to and a lack of outcry against the heinous acts by the likes of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other Islamic terrorist organizations by the majority of Muslim leaders, and Muslims in general throughout the world, and here in the United States as well. This does not stem from an endemic fear of reprisal, as has been proposed by some polemicists in the United States government and academia as regards the lack of outcry by Muslims against acts undertaken by Islamic jihadists, but rather it stems directly from the complete agreement in principle. Let me repeat that. It stems directly from the complete agreement in principle that they are simply carrying out the Quran's dictates as regards individuals that are not members of the Muslim faith or Islamic faith. It is time. No, it is past time that we in the West and here in America in particular not only recognize this threat to our freedom and liberty, our own security, both personal and national, and our way of life as a free nation, but it is also past time that we take the necessary steps to ensure that Islamic jihadism is eradicated from our shores. And this will require steps and measures that must be intrusive by their very nature, directed against the very enclaves that serve as support elements for the terrorists who undertake the actual terrorist operations. I am speaking of doing away with the hitherto U.S. government policy of hands-off as regards the Muslim communities, and yes, their mosques as well, which both serve to enhance the capabilities, movements, and other elements of support that these enclaves provide to terrorists operating here within our very own borders. Elements of support which are allowed to operate within these enclaves under the guise of religious freedom and tolerance of minority communities with complete impunity and lack of inspection or surveillance by law enforcement authorities. I believe in freedom of religion, individual freedom, and freedom of thought with every fiber of my being. I do not believe in freedom to plan and execute death and destruction of Americans in America, or anywhere else in the world for that matter. This is not a freedom as guaranteed by our Constitution. It is merely yet another example of the liberal left wanting us to all to turn a blind eye to the problem at hand and stand idly by as chaos reigns throughout our land, and which allows them to consolidate their own misguided principles and their power over the rest of us. They are allowing Islamic Jihadists to operate relatively freely, with the exception of the token law enforcement action, and ultimately assist them, the liberal left, in their agenda of control over the rest of us here in America by allowing chaos to reign and then stepping up to tout themselves as the remedy to the chaos is simply heinous in itself. Since its very inception during the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, communism has used chaos as a convenient tool to achieve it and its end goal. Communists used chaos in the Russian homeland near the conclusion of World War I, when Russia withdrew quite suddenly from the conflict to espouse their better way of life for the masses idealism. And it was the communists who shortly thereafter, when with only 8% of the overall Russian population on their side, the communists crushed and completely obliterated any opposition against them. And they did it all with the statement that only they, the communists, could bring order against the chaos in the country. A chaos which they, the Communist Party under Lenin and his power-hungry cronies, themselves instigated, fueled, controlled, and directed against the Russian people and monarchy in the most brutal and murderous of manner. I leave you, the reader of these musings, with two final questions for your contemplation. Are you ready to completely and irrevocably capitulate to the chaos and subsequent abandonment of even the very most basic tenements of our beloved Constitution by the current status quo to rule our nation? Or will you vote in the coming year to end the chaos and get rid of any and all of the communists, socialists, progressive, and liberal left who are currently in our government at all levels, who would continue to enslave even your very thoughts in their quest to destroy the very foundations of our beloved nation and remold, or to quote one of my least favorite people, fundamentally transform America into their own sick and squalor-ridden land? That, my friends, is the wisdom of a former CIA intelligence officer that spent the bulk of his life fighting for the United States of America, working for the United States of America, to protect the Constitutional Republic of the United States of America. I urge all of you, study the Quran. Look it up online. Look up Sharia law. Look up the fundamental principles of Islam. And bear in mind, ISIS. Do you even know what that stands for? Islamic State, Iraq, Syria. One of the attackers in France was a Syrian refugee. I've said it before and I'll say it again, and I will not change my opinion on this. Barack Obama is a Muslim sympathizer, a Muslim collaborator. Barack Obama is an enemy to the United States of America. And the sooner we, the American people, get up, wake up, pay attention, research, and learn what is happening on this planet and what is happening within our country and our political leaders in D.C. that are allowing it to happen. This has to happen. We must educate ourselves with the facts, with logic, and with critical thinking. And we are all capable of learning the facts. We are all capable of using logic. We are all capable of using critical thinking. Please do it now. Questions, comments? You can contact me at fredforwethepeople@gmail.com. Thank you.